Thanks for joining us on Two Age Sojourner. We're back without having 3 months or 4 months having passed in between. This is good. This is progress.
And that even sounded like a proper intro and everything. It's like,
really?
what's happening?
I don't know. A metamorphosis of such. It's something good, something exciting. But it's something that I've been looking forward to because the book that we're looking at right now, we were meant to read a chapter at a time, and kind of catch up a chapter, but then I just read the whole thing. I think you did the same thing.
No,
you didn't read the whole thing?
Didn't.
Oh no, I've had more than enough time. Usually you're the one that's doing that.
Yeah, I'm a good maybe 80 pages or so into it.
Okay, all right. Well, I actually got through the whole thing. So
you, man.
I've read it twice, my second time. So I feel
yeah, really,
yeah,
man, it must have been good.
Well, yeah, well, we'll talk about this.
Okay.
I mean, it's an interesting book. I do find it really interesting at many different levels. And so, yeah, I hardly ever read a book twice, to be honest. It's usually read and move on. There's enough out there to read. So it does say something. But then partly I just wanted to kind of cover it again, just because I knew we would be talking about it here and wanted to flesh out some of the ideas. But, for anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about, let me just see if I can get the cool. You don't have the hard copy on you, do you?
No, I'm using Kindle.
Kindle as well. All right. Well, I probably have a better picture to show people.
Kindle and Audible.
Okay, there we go. There's my Kindle copy on the nice iPad, although I don't know if the words even look right there. But Jesus, the Great Philosopher, Rediscovering the Wisdom Needed for the Good Life by Jonathan T. Pennington, who is at Southern, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So he's one of the professors there, and yeah, just like I'm always on the lookout for these kinds of books. There was that one by Douglas Groothuis, who wrote what was it called, just the Philosophy of Jesus or something. He wrote the Philosophy of Pascal. I might be getting the exact title wrong, but a Google search will remedy that. But as I think he does point out that there have been a few written like this, but they're usually very academic and very weighty, and they just dive right in there and almost inaccessible. I know Peter Criff, for example, has written something a little bit more accessible, as he thinks about the philosophy of like Jesus and Socrates, an imaginary conversation between them. So again, that's a little bit more accessible. But one of the things I really liked about this book is that it's almost like I have in mind like Wayne Grudem's very thin basic intro to basic doctrine, except it's like intro to philosophy, and he covers like all the ground. I mean, he really covers a breathtaking amount here, and just
it's
touches
super
it
accessible,
all.
super easy to get into,
super easy to read,
non-technical.
And yet it doesn't sacrifice depth. I mean, he's got some weighty thoughts in there. He's thinking through it. He's taking some stands on. He's not so all over the place that you can't figure out if there's any coherent system to what he's saying. I think it's quite lucid. He comes down strong on a few points. So just an all around. It's just a great book. It's just there are not many books like this. He does mention the Jewish thinker, what was his name, Yazoni or Mizoni? Something like that. I can't remember now. I haven't
listened to him recently on London Lyceum.
Oh, no way. It's cool.
Yeah.
Wow. I must check that out. That's excellent. Well, I mean, because I had a bit of a Google. I nearly bought one of his books. As he thinks about the Old Testament and philosophy. It's all relevant, by the way, for me, in that let me do a quick plug. Next semester at Grace Theological College, if you want to delve into this some more, we will be looking at this in the course on the writings, with a focus on the Psalms and Proverbs and that sort of thing. So I'm really interested in relating how some of this wisdom literature connects with ancient Near Eastern surroundings, and also Greco-Roman thought, and just general common grace philosophy, I suppose, and wisdom thinking. So this is somewhat preparatory for me, but at the same time, it's just a great topic we're always talking about.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question, maybe just before we get started.
Yoram Mazzoni, surely that's his name. Sorry.
Yes, that sounds about right. I just ran at it. Mazzoni.
Mazzoni. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, he talks about Jesus, the great philosopher, and the question that was going through my mind is, you look at philosophy, I guess, as a type of genre. Like we would look at Mendenhall and Klein using the Hittite suzerainty treaties
Yes.
as a genre that the Bible sort of patterned itself on.
Yeah.
You know, do you think that the scriptures are deliberately patterning themselves on philosophy as it was developed by, I guess, the Greek philosophers, who would be the paradigm?
Right.
Or is it rather a case of there are a bunch of boxes that through common grace philosophy happen to hit on?
Yeah.
And the Bible ticks on those boxes plus.
Yeah.
You know, would you, you know, how are you seeing it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose just before we get into how I see it, I mean, I think certainly thinking about that Yoram Mazzoni guy, I mean, he's you know, he's just taking this. I was really surprised, you know, that he took such a forthright, no, the Bible is actually meant to be read as wisdom, yeah, as philosophy, you know,
Yeah.
and really jumping right into that one box you mentioned. And I would think of that to be too much immediately. That's my knee jerk there.
Okay.
Obviously,
Yeah,
that's
I'm pretty much on the same page.
right, right. I imagine most of us would be.
Because the genre of philosophy is not this predefined box that the Bible's trying to conform itself to. Rather,
Yes.
philosophy through common grace, through general revelation, is able to think about God's creation and some of the big questions. They're thinking wrongly about those questions, but they're thinking rightly in those directions.
Mm.
And the Bible happens to answer those questions plus a bunch of other questions which people aren't even asking.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
makes it the greatest philosophy if we're defining it in terms of those boxes.
right. So I mean, and at the end of the day, you know, and look, you know, even some of this book, we'll get into this, but you know, there are some statements that I found very uncomfortable. You know, it's too far down the track in terms of, you know, how we're to approach the Bible as philosophical literature and so forth. It almost reminds me of, you know, you've got your who was that guy that did the ESV literary study Bible, Philip Ryken. Leland Ryken, yeah. And you know, so now reading the Bible as English literature, you know, and they've all got their things, and they just kind of like they all bring this great insight to the table, but obviously they're so excited about it. There's a danger of taking it too far, I think.
Yeah, useful as a lens, but not as a box.
I think so. I think that's a great sort of thing to keep in mind for all of this stuff, and yet not fear to be challenged in it, because, you know, obviously you don't want to sort of stop the process of growing and being wrong and whatnot. But I think that, yeah, you know, there's more to be said to prove a radical claim like that. They've not backed it up sufficiently, I think. But now also, I don't want to be unfair to Pennington, because, you know, I think what you were saying there is effectively also what he was saying, in that, you know, hey, these guys are all, you know, what is philosophy, right? It's the love of wisdom at the broadest level. It's undeniable that the Bible pursues the same questions of philosophy, and you know, it is true. I think it's just undeniably true that this reality gets ignored. I mean, evangelicalism certainly ignores it, from my experience, where you wouldn't, you know, as you said, I think it opens up the book with this. You know, you've got the banners, Jesus, this, you know, that, and the king, and but the I mean, just by virtue of the fact that you have a guy like Solomon who foreshadows Christ, you know, there is this reality given to Christ, who became our righteousness and our wisdom, you know, and the one who is, you know, profoundly wise on all the elements pertaining to you know, those questions of metaphysics through to, you know, the good life and so forth, and all these things that he's bringing up as points of, like, almost categorical points of philosophical inquiry over the years, not only in Greco-Roman thought, but just in general. So I think, you know, the Bible just does touch it, you know, and maybe it's because a lot of people will look at, and I think probably I've experienced some of this, and have spoken to people who have fallen into this, where, you know, Paul condemn the world's philosophy, you know?
Yeah, Colossians 2. Yeah.
Right. And so what are we doing, toying around with this? Are you just, you know, Paul clearly says it's all nonsense. We've got the Bible
What
now.
does Athens have to do with Jerusalem?
Yeah, right. Exactly. You know, there we go. So you've got a guy like Tertullian versus a guy like, let's say, Justin Martyr, who he quotes from frequently.
And Luther, you know, just denunciating the scholastics and the philosophers and
right, totally, yeah, exactly. So, you know, there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of that in Reformed thinking, in the Reformed, certainly, my goodness, if you get down the line with some of the, you know, anti-dualism literature and neo-Calvinism and David and all that, I mean, even though they're engaging at a weighty philosophical task, they really are condemning anything that's not based on a Christian ground motive.
Van Til and Van Tilianism.
Van Til, exactly. But even in those guys, those instances, they're all, by virtue of their conversations with philosophy, they're showing their interest in the same subjects and just wanting to approach it from a distinctly Christian perspective, which I think, there were times in the book where I felt like, oh, wow, he's super transformationalist. He's actually trying to reject common grace and say, no, we're meant to just totally go with Jesus, the philosopher, to rule in place of all other philosophers.
Let's go to the Old Testament for how to do politics. Yeah.
Right. So you also get that feeling. A few places there where, my two-age scruples was squirming. But,
definitely.
But at the same time, you bring it back, and he would say things that I felt made me think, I've misunderstood him. I need to reread, or maybe I'm reading that too. I'm too quickly jumping to those conclusions, because he would affirm very clearly the reality that we go plunder from the Egyptians, and there's this reality of common grace. And I really liked the bit that he did on the Stoics. I thought he nailed it, to be honest. I thought, the Stoics have been on my mind for a long time. I've been reading through, I think I've read through most of the Stoics at this point, the main works. And yeah, just, it's, for me, it's like one of the most interesting, I find myself just constantly perplexed about how I feel about Stoicism, because it's so close to what Christianity's saying.
Exactly.
And yet it's so different.
Just touching on that, today I was reading about amor fati. Do you know that?
Yeah, right. The
love of fate.
The love of fate, right? Yeah.
So basically, the love of fate is the whole concept the Stoic used to basically say, you shouldn't be wishing for another now.
No.
You should be happy in the now that you're in.
He does mention that, right? That's in the book.
I didn't get it from him. I've been reading someone else.
Okay, I thought you were going to, yeah.
And as I was interacting with it, I thought, it's contentment without God. It should be amor providentia.
Right.
Because what we have is we don't have an arbitrary God or gods out there who may or may not be out there for our good.
Right.
Because we're children of God through Jesus Christ. We have a Father who causes all things to work together for good. So I think what we find and as I was meditating on the resonance between Stoicism and Christianity, they're stumbling onto what our hearts need.
Yes.
But they're answering it with the wrong answers. And then scripture just comes and kiss on the lips.
You know what's interesting?
This is what you needed to believe the whole time.
Yeah. Sometimes what I find though is that they actually answer it with the right answers, but they can't give grounds for those answers. This is what I find interesting, in that they will almost create a kind of way to assure yourself in times of calamity and so forth. Exactly. that really is only true for a Christian.
Exactly. How can you assure yourself in times of calamity when you don't have a God who is your Father, who is covenanted to you, who is propitiated through the sacrifice of Christ, and who has guaranteed you on the basis of his eternal decree, which is immutable, that he's going to glorify you?
Yeah, exactly. It's groundless. It denies sin. It denies the problem of sin. Certainly, that's a big issue. But yet, it's quite. It's a mixture between morbid curiosity and amusement and actual help along the line and real insight sometimes. In that they'll be like, here they are jumping like 1, 2, skip a few, jump over all of that, get to the consolation, and here I'm finding myself reading it, and through Christ, who is my savior and philosopher, I'm actually able to interpret that and actually receive more encouragement from what the Stoic is saying that I'm sure he himself was able to receive. So I find that to be a really interesting dynamic. It's one of the reasons I do want to try and, if I had another life, almost, I would like to try and, almost expand on what the Proverbs are saying, or some of that wisdom literature.
That could be your third PhD.
Yeah, just exactly. But maybe someone else wants to do this. They just take that and look at the way the Stoics would expand on those concepts, and almost allow them to be the expositors through the lens of common grace. And then what he says in the book, which I think is just fantastic, is that it's that the Stoics are coming so close to Christianity on certain things that they're saying. They'll make some excellent points that we all agree on, like it's not a good idea to get caught up in you'll put your happiness in what someone else is thinking, rather focus on your own sins, your own problem, your own faults, exercise mercy, exercise all, we don't have any problem, as Paul would say, against such things there is no law, right? But the we are saying just so much more than they're saying, and that's the key. It's like, and all of that comes to bear in Jesus. And I love the way that he showed the sophistication of the Christian approach, in that, you have almost these extremities developing to handle life and its harshness. So Stoics, for example, will come along and just go, okay, well, listen, the only way you're ever going to find any level of peace here is through a detachment, almost like a Buddhist philosophy. Just sweep it under the rug, just get rid of it. And Christianity is, even at that level, able to affirm the way that we need to kind of loosen our grip on this life.
But we rejoice in hope, because we have a hope that cannot fail.
And we're not actually, like just pointlessly loosening our grip. There is a substance to what we understand true life to be. And so there's just, it's almost like he went through the Epicureans as well. And showed how even on that side, you have an ability to appreciate the pleasure aspects of life, and yet with a view of sin that keeps things in check. So, just working with these big ideas that have floated around, certainly in ancient Greco-Roman times, you see how Christianity provides a really robust, awesome, it felt like it was a little bit different, from, because I've heard that kind of stuff before from neo-Calvinists, where they're going, well, Christianity holds its own and it's marketplace of ideas and all that sort of stuff. And I agree, but what suffers there is the common grace piece and plundering the Egyptians and so forth. And I felt that he did this. He sort of found this balance. I don't even know how he really did it. And that's what got me reading it again, trying to figure out how this all works. But he seems to have found a balance or just a way to affirm everything in a good place. Yeah.
I guess what was really helpful, and I'm just sort of dipping in now into the second chapter, the genius of ancient philosophy. He sort of laid the groundwork, just helping us to see that, when you and I hear the word philosophy, what do we automatically think of? Think of a guy maybe sitting there in an ivory tower with his, the thinker, pondering the great things of life in a sort of abstract, detached, cut-off way. And what he does is he starts off with a definition of philosophy that basically we would probably insert the word worldview. Where philosophy is not just the cranial approach to reality, or a consideration of theories, or for people who really like to argue and delve into mathematics or some difficult stuff. And on page 18 he sort of says, philosophy in the ancient world was the lodestar, the scaffolding, the guide by which humans could experience true happiness. It was the vision for life itself. Philosophy provided the vision for the good and the goodness of life. And so basically it was a whole integrated understanding. And then what he does is he sort of goes on to show how in the modern world we've compartmentalized everything. Where we live with massive inconsistencies in our worldview in the modern world, don't we? I mean, we believe in things like evolution and science, which if we took to its logical conclusion should have no spirituality in it, yet will hold people in this age would hold evolution in one hand, and then they'd delve into new age spirituality with the other hand and try and bring these things together in just massively inconsistent ways.
Totally.
Because their lives are fragmented, they're splintered up into just these inconsistent bubbles that aren't even built on a single foundational worldview. And what he's doing is he's sort of taking you to a comprehensive life vision.
Yes.
The way in which we should be thinking about, answering all the big questions so that we can answer, all the little questions, and then, be able to live the good life.
Exactly.
And starting there, I guess what it does is it kills some of the initial bias and prejudice that we have attached to the concept of philosophy.
Yeah. I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
He definitely, he shows there's a big disconnect with what we have today, post Enlightenment and so forth, in comparison to what we typically talk about when you have an ancient Greek philosophy in view. And I think one of the big things there is, and I think he's right, as you say, this pursuit for the good life, the pursuit for a framework and
living and dying well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so winsome about it. Sometimes, you look at these guys and you realize they are all schools of discipleship. And, even on that point, we asked earlier, is Christianity intentionally modeling itself off like the Greek schools of, well, probably not. I mean, no, but at the same time,
there are common hungers in the human heart which they're speaking to.
Well, and even beyond that, there are common, cultural pieces that are being leveraged. So, for example, we talk about A&E culture and covenants and whatnot, but it didn't feel impossible to me that Jesus is speaking in a very obviously self-aware discipleship culture, with these philosopher/gurus, maybe we'd call them today.
Well, I mean, he made a few good historical points. So what he highlighted is, of course, you got the Old Testament, and you get someone like Philo coming along to try and make the Old Testament relevant to Greek thinking. Philo, through his influence, gives rise, and then just through various things impacting the dispersion, and Israel trying to come to grips with living under the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. Greek philosophy shaped rabbinic teaching and the rabbinic schools, and rabbis having disciples, and the ways in which rabbis, obviously in keeping with massive influences from the Hebrew Bible, but also being influenced by culture, and that was shaping the sort of thing. So when Jesus comes along, he's stepping into a culture that has been shaped by Greek philosophy,
and and he's not obviously kicking against that particular form of the culture where you have your disciples and you mold them, not so much through what you write in it from an academic tower, but through your life together and so forth. Exactly. All of that, it's Jesus is using that. It's part of that setup that has been ready for his appearing, so to speak.
Yeah. So he points out a couple of, I guess, key ingredients, things like aphorisms. With the sayings. Take the out of your own eye before you take it out your brother's eye.
Right. These memorable.
The first will be last. The last will be first.
Yeah.
And then also the whole notion of parables and fables. He tries to line those up. I was a little bit hesitant to do so.
Well, where I landed with that, it's like, yes, but so much more in the parables, exactly. In that, yes, you've got that component there, sure. But it's just like to reduce a parable to that is the problem, And so I found myself saying that again and again. I think he said it again and again as well.
Yes,
it's a dimension that is neglected, which is why it's quite exciting to look at and recover in some sense. But, as long as we're not reducing it just to that, because that would be a problem. And to be fair, I don't think he was. I love the opener as well, where he's just saying, look, as a point of fact, you just do have these early artistic representations of Jesus, in the obviously in a philosophical sort of garb. It's the way they perceived him, in light of those who would travel and teach their philosophies and world life views,
Yep. So when you walked into the early church and they had pictures on the walls, they did have pictures. Sorry, Reformed people. Exactly. Jesus would have a short haircut, like the Greek philosopher would have, and he'd have the toga, which would be the right shoulder would be bare, the left shoulder would be, the throw over, and he'd be standing there either with a scroll or in a teaching pose, perhaps even sitting down. Just so when the people heard the Bible or read the Bible, they automatically associated with philosophy in them.
Right. Yeah, and it's not even telling us about Jesus at that point, but more about the way people understood his ministry and would have perceived the current the day. I get this also from just preaching through Hebrews, and you see also the way that the author there kind of just is very very connected to and I think you see this in Paul as well, the thoughts of the day. There's some allusions there, almost undeniable, to the way Hercules 12 conquests and whatnot, and all these little things that are being brought in very subtly, but I think in ways that show, hey, he understands what people, as a Hellenistic audience, is the way they're approaching life and approaching Jesus. So yeah, a lot of it was resonating with me at that front. And it certainly almost gave me a desire to go over, you mentioned the parables, but really, as you think about all these big topics, like the good life, the meaning of life, politics, what else, all these he goes to these big ideas.
So I mean, on page 28, he sort of maps out the four main compass points of what I guess philosophy would touch on.
Yes.
And I thought these were good
Ethics.
points. Yep. So he begins with metaphysics,
metaphysics,
what is
epistemology.
the true nature of the universe? How does the world work? What is there? And, then so I guess we would call that ontology in theology, Then he goes into epistemology. How do we know what's there?
Yeah.
Then he goes into ethics. What is right and how do we live it out? And then the fourth point is politics.
Yeah.
How do we structure society and institutions in the best and wisest ways? And I think, what is true about philosophy as an integrated worldview, as a vision for life, which the ancient people they were ahead of the modern man in the sense that they had a worldview that answered all these questions, whereas the modern person just doesn't. Just in my reading of Tim Keller and Charles Taylor and others, that's one of the things they've highlighted in terms of apologetics. We have a barren worldview. When we look at death, we don't have a way to understand death. We're just animals who die. When we look at the future, it's all naturalistic. And so when it comes to suffering, we have no lens to interpret it with. Because we don't there's no meaning in our universe. So these guys had definitely had a leg up, but and so it's pretty comprehensive. But as I was just looking at the things that they touched on, I think there's one sort of missing fact, and this is what the Bible would, the gaps that it would fill. So metaphysics, what is there to be known? There's the creator-creature distinction. There's God, and then he makes everything else. So we would agree with that. Epistemology, how do we know it? God reveals himself, and there's general revelation, there's special revelation, there's the incarnation. But then at some point, the Bible would include the fall. It would include sin. It would include, there's no soteriology. So that's the missing ingredient in what philosophy can come to grips with.
I suppose that might fit into ethics in some sense.
Because now that we know that we're broken and we know what is right, and we don't want to do the right, though we understand the right, and sometimes we want the right, but we don't have the power to do the right. So Christ has to redeem us and then fill us with His Spirit and then guide us with His Word. Definitely.
One of the points that he makes,
but that's a much more complex understanding of ethics, isn't it?
Yes. Exactly. And there's something to say on the politics there as well, because he brings that as one of these big these points to look at, these touchstones. But one of the things he does say, just dealing with the ethics and the debates that go on in contemporary philosophical, ethical sort of discussions, he which I found really helpful, is he deals with the issue of altruism and how that stems really from a much later basis, and how the philosophers of ancient Greece are very much in step with Christianity in this idea of virtue and doing something. It's not that if you in order for something to be virtuous, or in order to be something to be truly good, you must receive no benefit from it, or something like that. That's really moving very much out of step with this greater sophistication of the biblical worldview. So I found that he obviously knows a good bit about that and has done his reading, and to distill it down at this level, in this context and discussion was extremely helpful. It was probably one of the highlights for me. That plus the Stoicism comparison, I think, would be big. The politics thing is like, I was wincing when I came there, because I'm like, oh boy, here we go, And
so the politics thing comes in sort of the third chapter, or the Bible as philosophy, and he begins with the Old Testament.
So we're not making.
He starts off well,
Yes.
Looking at Moses as a philosopher. It's all good.
I appreciate that part.
Moses ticks the box of
Yes.
He ticks the box of epistemology, revelation. He ticks the box of ethics.
Yes.
Then when he starts to get into politics, and basically you take the 10 Commandments, and that's some old politics,
right? Because now the thing that was missing, which is here's why you listen to 2H Sojourner, folks. This is it. It's missing this covenantal multiformity and continuity and the change and the progression and all the covenant theology that we love to talk about, and the republication element and so forth. So I think, but with that in place, I found that I could hear what he was saying without too much problem. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised. Like, I do agree with him that the Bible is a political book, and that Jesus being a king of a kingdom. I mean, you can't read Christianity as not political. It is political. It's just it's a matter of knowing how that politics fits into this present age. No one's denying the politics of the Bible in that sense. And I suppose that's where, much debate is to be had. Is this, as we know, the theonomists would take a lot of what he was saying there and applied through a theonomist rubric. I don't think it would go so well. Yeah. But
he's not promoting theonomy. He's probably promoting more of a transformational
thing.
Yeah,
not even
not even theocracy, but transformational. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, using the same hermeneutic ultimately, hey, this is basically the wisdom that we need to recover for a full life view, and if you
here's a quote from page 49. So he's talking about the Politeia, and he says, this divinely revealed political philosophy was not just for the sake of the Hebrew people, but was also a model for all the nations. It is a picture of how the true God has structured the cosmos and the means by which humans may experience flourishing or shalom.
I
agree.
Say,
if you isolate that statement and you think, okay, so if we want to experience shalom, what we need to do is we need a tribal patriarchy where we have elders who, these kangaroo courts in every city. We have a centralized religious temple which has Levites scattered throughout the land. We go back to not slavery, but we have this indentured servitude as a form of debt relief.
But it's not, at the same time,
he's not saying that, but that's what that statement.
No, you could exactly. I agree. Yeah, they could take that and run with it in really bad ways. But you could also take that through a Kleinian rubric quite easily, because the eschatological intrusion aspect, the kingdom is revealed in Israel at its height of typology through the wisdom of Solomon. You have, when you're meant to look at Solomon, who's now the son of David, who has come to the throne, and Israel is in a place of Sabbath rest, and it's prospering, in a way that you can't even fathom. You have the nations looking upon them and just gasping. And the point there is to show this is what happens when Jesus, this is the good life. This is the shalom, that you're meant to be seeing in the Old Testament. So, at that level, as long as applied through our wonderful eschatological intrusion.
Typology would help us to see the redemptive elements, not merely the moral elements.
Right. Yes.
Because what this does is it makes everything moral.
Right.
Instead of everything redemptive,
Yeah, that's true. But even the moral side, again, I think I found like it was a real, this is probably one of the reasons again that I wanted to read it twice, because if I found it so like challenging and exhilarating, like is this actually right? Is this wrong? Is this, can we agree with that? Do we not agree with that? And I found most of it like, it was almost like anything. It's just ask the wrong questions, get the wrong answers kind of thing, I suppose, is where I came back to. He's not dealing with the issue from a covenantal perspective.
No, he's speaking pretty generally. So, I mean, what I appreciated was, he, under politics, he would say things like the institution of things like marriage, the institution of the family, the institution of community.
Yes.
It's the people of God being a love community together and doing the will of God together. That's, and I think that's general enough not to commit to any sort of political model.
Right.
And so from that point of view, it's definitely helpful. So he's just helping us to see how the Bible ticks certain boxes that philosophy is concerned about.
Yeah.
and informs them in a good way.
It really does. I mean, you think of Plato's Republic, you think of, what is Aristotle's one again? The Political something, I can't remember. But basically, just as you go through the ins and outs of
Nicomachean Ethics or something.
No, there was another one. I can't remember it now. It's on politics, but anyway, so he if you've ever done a course on it, you see how weird it gets sometimes. Aristotle a little bit less so than Plato, but Plato advocates some pretty weird things. But as he's kind of, you can see how politics factors into this philosophical pursuit, and even in terms of a New Testament lens, even in terms of Jesus's teaching, there is the talk about a city. It is concerned with the politeia. It is concerned about these things, but it's just breaking it open in terms of eschatological new creation and, and all of these things that philosophers wouldn't even dream of saying and going. But, we have the final city at the end. This is a concern of Jesus. So even that, it brings a nice, it sets a backdrop to showcase the genius of Christianity and its power, I don't want to say the marketplace of ideas, but kind of, marketplace of ancient ideas.
Let me read his summary with regards to the Old Testament. So he says this, I'm on page 51. He says, the Hebrew scriptures provided divinely revealed metaphysic. So he's ticking his boxes now. Metaphysic, epistemology, virtue ethic, and political philosophy based on the ultimate good, God himself.
Mhm.
This revelation is for the good of humanity, to shape and train humanity to see and be in the world in the particular ways that alone promise true flourishing and happiness, because they're rooted in God's nature. And then he quotes Psalm 1, happy is the man.
Yeah.
So I don't know what, I wanted to ask you this question. How is this different from, I guess, if we step into the world of preaching and homiletics,
Yeah.
and some of the bad molds that we would critique? We would say, so we look at expository preaching, and the application has to come from the text itself, and we often criticize preaching that's too anecdotal, or preaching that's too, 5 steps for parenting, four tips for a healthy marriage. Now, how is this approach to philosophy not sort of playing into the hands of that approach?
Right. Totally. And I think I was frantically searching while you were talking, because right at the end of the book here somewhere, I'm just paging through.
Yeah, so I haven't read there, so I haven't seen his answers. These are the questions I'm carrying with me as I'm going through.
Yeah, and he does deal with it. He in fact, almost exactly as you've stated it there. Let me just have a quick squiz here.
You go for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not popping out of me, but from memory, he says, well, it almost relates to the prosperity gospel. Let's just go all the way. What's the difference here between prosperity gospel? And then he brings out a kind of yet another nuance, which I think is important, in that he's not advocating this in opposition to suffering. He's not advocating this in opposition. So he goes through all the little things and shows how they can work together, and it's not one over the other.
So it's not a triumphalistic ethic.
It's not a triumphalistic ethic. It's not a prosperity alone ethic. I think what he wants to do, and this is the point that resonated with me anyway. I felt I needed to do more thinking on this anyway, because he said, like, he'll say, even though that's all in place, when I say to you, life, Jesus has come to bring you life, do you think this life at all, or do you think only heaven? And I think I do. I think only heaven. So I think that is wrong. I think I do need to. There is some level of continuity, but it's not to the neglect of suffering. It's not that we're getting, like, we're not getting high on suffering either. We don't really want suffering, but it's just that there is something about what Jesus does now that brings life here and now, and this is the 2-age thing that we must reconcile with, and something that he's trying to connect with by way of the philosophical good life pursuit there.
So I guess it would be what he's trying to, I guess, balance out would be, because you got the imperative and you got the indicative, and it can be a neo-Calvinistic tendency to make the whole Bible imperative only. Where it's all what Jesus has done, and now you can get your salvation and go to heaven when you die, or the new creation if he comes again.
Yes.
But we're too scared to even talk about the wisdom having any practical application for this life, unless we sound like the mega church model, which we're trying to avoid.
Right.
But what we're saying is, well, look, there is
a real deal here.
There's wisdom. There's wisdom literature, to live the good life now.
And I don't know if you've
common sense. There's good stuff in it.
Yeah, and having the dovetails. I mean, have you preached the book of Proverbs recently?
I haven't, but I do love the book of Proverbs. I do.
I love it for the practical wisdom stuff, right?
Exactly. I do the odd topical sermon from Proverbs whenever I want to break.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's great. I think it's a great approach, and I think more people should do it. I've sort of, I'm definitely moving in that direction too, where it's neglecting a certain genre in scripture.
For me, this Proverbs is the psychology manual of the Bible.
I know. Yeah. Well,
I mean, this is it is so penetrating.
It's
so penetrating. Even just the proverb, the one that immediately just jumped to my mind now is, to the hungry every bitter thing is sweet.
Yes.
And the picture I have in my mind is a woman who's in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
She's hungry for love, she's hungry for intimacy, she's hungry for connection, she's hungry for approval. And to her, every bitter thing is sweet. Even though her husband mistreats her, she takes it as, whatever she can get.
Yeah.
So I mean, even just stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and interesting you mentioned that, because, in terms of ancient philosophy, I mean, that really has got a very strong connection to what we talk about today as psychology rather than philosophy. We are thinking there about, trying to find a framework for how to handle life and its problems. And and you have positive psychology is basically the Stoics repeated, right? All these elements in cognitive behavioral theory. And
yes, cognitive behavioral theory.
that's you read through one of these CBT manuals, it's like literally reading through Marcus Aurelius. There's just no difference. And maybe some less quips about the gods. That's pretty much it. The rest is exactly the same. So it's just very interesting that the philosophy component would come through in that form of psychology, and that form of psychology is what we're registering with some elements of scripture. It all just feels like these things that have to be connected a little bit more clearly. But yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it does. Like, I would not be. I think part of what this book was doing to me is, it's like we've been through that homiletics debate so many times by way of legalism and redemptive historical. This was just coming at it from a really fresh angle that didn't touch the matter of legalism at all. It's just
avoiding those categories and bringing a fresh voice.
And I think that's always good. It's always just helps to round things up a little bit. He says, in terms of the we were saying a little bit earlier around the suffering piece, the Old Testament is not an idealized mythology of easy happiness. It's not a philosophy that proclaims all suffering to be inconsequential or unreal. So, like, you think about some of those elements of Stoicism and Buddhism even. Neither is it a hopeless story of sin and destruction or postmodern literary anti-heroes. No, the story of Israel from creation through the prophets casts a vision of the possibility of deep flourishing, even in the midst of inevitable loss and suffering. So that's, obviously that's, we're thinking new creation there, but that's true now. Even now, there's a redemptive thing going on, and it doesn't touch legalism. It's not you don't have to worry about that. So I found that sort of thing very helpful.
Yeah, the Bible does have a unique perspective on suffering, doesn't it? Because think about Habakkuk. I will yet praise him. Even though the fig tree does not bear fruit, and it's all bad now. We have a covenant. We have a God who's in covenant with us, who will prove faithful.
Exactly.
And our confidence is on the basis of him covenanting to us, especially in light of Christ.
Right.
We have a much greater confidence in the new covenant.
Yeah.
And we have a hope that cannot be shaken. And so we do suffer, but it's part of his purpose. It comes from a Father, and so it's not just a forced emoting. It's not just put a smile on your dial and get on with it. Turn that frown upside down.
Exactly. And the other thing, I think, it's just a big piece. If you're thinking about this book and maybe this concept of, how Jesus would portray himself or be, in fact, a great philosopher, the great philosopher. Often, whether it be Stoics or otherwise, in ancient Greek philosophy, you hear them talking about the way nature works, the conformity of nature, they just observe things, right? They're just there they are, looking and writing and observing, and they're going, listen, this is the way it works, whether you like it or not. And it makes sense then to conform, because virtue conforms to the way things go to bring flourishing. So if you want, they often use the illustration of someone who is going to get dragged along by a cart, or walk along with the cart, with a rope connecting them. This is the way the world works. And it's true, as I read the book of Proverbs, this is, the opening few chapters, especially, this is how God made the world. This is how it works. And wisdom it works in connection with the way God made this world.
So the way I put it is Christianity and something like Stoicism or the ancient philosophies.
Yeah.
They have a common worldview in the sense that, they have common cause against postmodernism, which denies that there is a truth, that there is a common reality, that there is natural law. They're stealing, they're working on borrowed capital that arises from conscience and their engagement with nature without recognizing the creator. And we're just bringing the creator.
Well, and it's, to use Paul's language, in many times they do recognize the unknown God. There is something, it is amazing, to be honest. They talk about him as the author, the author. Well,
they recognize judgment. They know what sin is. They know that there must be a judgment. There will be a reckoning. They have a conscience.
Right. So not even on those points are they with postmodernism or atheism or whatever. They're a lot closer to that Christian trajectory of thought.
And we're not denying total depravity. Let's clarify that.
No, we're not.
What we're saying is that through general revelation and common grace, they stumble onto a lot of truth, which they then in turn hold irrationally, that they suppress, that they hold in contradiction with all sorts of other things.
Right.
Due to not being regenerate.
Yeah. And in common grace have been allowed to just transcend more than others, they've been, they've just, as I think it was Kelvin who was saying, I mean, who would deny that these insights they are gifts of God, they can't be denied. I mean, the beauty captured by some of these artists, the literary form by some of these authors, the thoughts and concepts by some of these philosophers, they are blind as bats ultimately, but are given these graces in a common sense. And it's not like common grace means that everyone is exactly the same on that either. So wherever there is, I think it was Justin Martyr who said, listen, because of Christ, we can now take what's ours, which is all truth, all beauty, all goodness. And wherever we find it, it's ours. It belongs to us, because it belongs to our master and it comes from him. So we take it. And I think that is an important part of this. So is Jesus a philosopher?
What do you mean by philosophy? And I think the way that he sets it up, the answer is definitely yes.
Yes.
If he's a man who presents to you the good life that is directed towards the good, a person who can live and die well in light of the truth, in light of reality, that touches on, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and politics, then definitely.
Right. And yes, but not only
and
that,
more,
so much more.
Yes, exactly.
There we go.
And because the missing ingredient to philosophy is the denial of they don't have the history that the Bible includes, which is our creator, who we are in light of being made in the image of God, in our relationship to God, and then of course the fall and redemption.
Right.
Without those ingredients, everything gets a wrong slant, but then there's just so many that come so close. In a lot of areas. Well,
I was thinking about it, it's almost like we're happy to talk about Jesus as a prophet sometimes, we're happy to talk about him as a priest and as a king. But if you think about, you could take any one of those things. You could take Jesus as a king, and if you were just going to compare him to kings and leave him as a king, you've lost justification, you've lost mediation, you've lost intercession, you've lost all of these things that Jesus is for us, which are absolutely vital. And so in the same way, and you could apply that to any one of those things, you can't lose his kingship, even if you hold on to his priestly ministry. And the philosophical element here is really his teaching at some level. And so, yes, absolutely, we want that. And but never to the neglect of those other things. So Jesus is that plus so much more.
So I guess what we got to say is we got to celebrate what is true in philosophy and acknowledge what God has done through common grace, but recognize the limitations of philosophy, because they do need special revelation and all that comes with the gospel as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. And if that's clear as mud, then go read the book,
buy his book. Helpful. It's helpful. And what it'll do is it'll surprise you into thinking about, if you've been well trained in certain ways of reformed thinking that are suspicious of all things philosophical, it will help you to be more sympathetic to what God is doing through common grace.
Most definitely. Couldn't agree more. Good. Well, let's leave it at that for episode 400.
Whoa! I hope you're blowing your trumpet there.
I mean, that was my vuvu, my mini vuvuzela. One of those little. So we're actually hush hush about it, because we don't actually want to have our 400 party yet. Andre's not here. Andre is in Turkey, by the way. He's like moving around and going on little biblical tours and doing all sorts
shaving
of
his back.
We'll not talk about that now, but when he gets back, we'll try and do something special, that'd be good. But 400, we're getting up there, not bad.
That's amazing.
So thanks, Nick, appreciate it, bro.
Yeah, man.